Dinosaurs and man, two species separated by 65 million years of evolution, just been suddenly thrown back into the mix together. How can we possibly have the slightest idea of what to expect?
Hello, and welcome to the NeoJurassic podcast, a speculative exploration into the wild possibilities of a NeoJurassic world. I'm your very humble host, Bri, and I am so glad you've decided to join us. Truly, thank you so much for tuning into this, our second of episodes. This episode is a particularly big one. So big that ultimately I decided to show y'all some mercy and split it up across two somewhat more manageable weekly installments. The story of Jurassic Park essentially began as a cautionary sci-fi tale about the dangers of unregulated genetic engineering and man's dangerous delusions of control. As the series has progressed, however, the focus has largely shifted towards what could be argued are more tangible and pressing concerns. In our last episode, for instance, we took a look at how corporate greed could lead to today's tech gods resurrecting the largest flying animal that has ever lived. Today, we'll be exploring how feral de-extincted megafauna could impact the world's ecosystems and raise some serious existential questions about what can even be considered natural in this rapidly changing world of ours. As I'm sure you may know, the most recent feature-length Jurassic film, Fallen Kingdom, ended with animals from Isla Nublar being released into the wilds of Northern California. The internet was immediately ablaze about the implications of dinosaurs running wild across North America. How long would it be before they were all wrangled up? Would they all be euthanized? If not, where are they going to go? A year later, the short film Battle at Big Rock offered us a glimpse at what this new Neo-Jurassic world could look like. A family camping in the forest of California narrowly survive a confrontation between an adult Allosaurus, and a very big one at that, and a small family of Pseudoceratops. A young girl is somewhat hilariously pursued by a pack of hungry Compsognathus. And a thirsty Parizenosaurus drops in on what appeared to be the set of Grumpier Old Men 3. Those are just a handful of the possibilities suggested. As the franchise moves forward, it is clear these creatures will no longer be relegated to a pair of islands off the coast of Costa Rica. No, I think we'll be looking at a world in which these animals could conceivably show up just about anywhere and in any context you would expect an animal to be. You know, a group of compies rooting for chicken bones and pizza crusts in a suburban trash can. A lone baryonyx stalking for prey alongside the Pacific Coast Highway. Or, as we're about to hear in this episode's fictional newscast from a fictional Neo-Jurassic world, a fiercely territorial group of Dinochirus establishing themselves a breeding colony way out there in the everglades.
Florida's Everglades. The area has long been known for its struggle with destructive invasive reptiles. Burmese pythons, Argentine tegus, and Nile monitors have been but a few of the troublesome invasive species to take up residence there. Over the last 2 decades, these voracious and prolific animals have taken a tremendous toll on native wildlife. Now, the Florida government is grappling with the arrival of yet another introduced species. A particularly foreign species that is not only from another continent, but from 70 million years in the past. The spectacularly bizarre 7-ton de-extincted dinosaur, Dinochirus mirificus. The Cretaceous animal is certainly among the stranger dinosaurs to have been resurrected. Looking at it, you could be forgiven for thinking it was the product of some gravely misguided hybridization effort. At 40 feet in length, with 8-foot-long forearms, a tall dorsal hump, shaggy patches of fur-like feathers, and a thick duck-like bill, the animal is as intimidating as it is bizarre. Although the species is predominantly herbivorous, it would be wise to stay your distance. As local 54-year-old python trapper Tammy Fox discovered, these animals are already fiercely territorial of their new home. As part of the state's ongoing python pickup program, Tammy is one of several hundred individuals regularly patrolling the Everglades for invasive pythons. Last June, Tammy and her beloved 2001 Chevy Silverado ventured far out to an area of the park rarely visited by other python hunters. The hope was to score a sizable bounty or two far off the beaten path. The Everglades, however, had other plans, and Tammy stumbled upon an invasive critter far more formidable than a 15-foot python.
Well, I went out after my shift at the Waffle House, as I usually do. The pythons are usually easier to find at night, so I took my truck out. And kind of way out this time. I had pretty lousy luck lately, so I figured I'd try that part of the park that butts up against that busted drug lord's compound. I figured ain't nobody goes there, and, maybe I'll have some better luck this time. And so I was driving out there maybe like an hour and a half, and I seen something big moving out of the corner of my eye, right out of the corner of my eye. And then I heard this sound like I ain't never heard before. So I stopped the car, I got my gun, my snake bag, and I stepped out of the car for a closer look. I was real scared because this area was known for some sketchy activity, with the drugs and the illegals and whatnot. So I was scared, and I got like no cell service out there at all.
Over the last 3 decades, the area of the park Tammy found herself in had become well known as a major through line for South Florida's drug trafficking network. Little over a year ago, most of these operations were shut down in a sweeping series of raids. Still, park guests rarely ever dare to venture quite so far into this troubled area of the park.
I didn't really know what I had seen or what I was even looking at out there. I was out there using my little phone as a flashlight, looking out where I seen this little cypress grove, about 40 feet from where we are right now, right over there. And I took a few steps out into the water. And next thing I knew, from up and behind me, I heard this loud booming honk. And then I just seen my truck get shoved right off the road, like right there into the water, just right off. And I was terrified at that point.
With no cell service and her truck completely totaled, Tammy was effectively marooned. Trapped in an infrequently patrolled area of the park and surrounded by a group of 7-ton angry brooding dinosaurs, Tammy wasn't sure she would see another day.
I was real scared because this area was known for some sketchy activity, with the drugs and the illegals and whatnot. So I was scared, and I got like no cell service out there at all. I didn't really know what I had seen or what I was even looking at out there. I was out there using my little phone as a flashlight, looking out where I seen this little cypress grove, about 40 feet from where we are right now, right over there. And I took a few steps out into the water. And next thing I knew, from up and behind me, I heard this loud booming honk. And then I just seen my truck get shoved right off the road, like right there into the water, just right off. And I was terrified at that point. I was lost out there for, a good 10 hours or so. I was hiding in some shrubs, just telling myself, keep it together, Tamala, keep it together, girl. I couldn't see nothing, but I could hear something big, and I smelled something big. And once the sun went up, I seen what I was dealing with. I couldn't believe my eyes. These huge humpback moose goose monsters walking around, making all this ruckus. I went out hoping to bag a big python. No way in hell did I expect to find a fucking dinosaur.
Several hours later, and 5 miles from her now crushed truck, Miss Hawks was eventually picked up by a patrolling Florida Fish and Wildlife team. Skeptical of Tammy's account of the incident, it would be 3 days before park rangers investigated the area and discovered the animals for themselves. And it wasn't long after this discovery that a nationwide media circus ensued. It has now been 8 months since Miss Fox stumbled upon these colossal swamp things. Since then, we've learned the animals have established a small breeding colony. What began as an estimated group of 4 to 5 adult animals has now exploded in numbers. Wildlife experts like Brad Lindstrom believe there may now be as many as 30 of the animals established throughout the park.
Last summer, we'd estimated the animals had laid as many as 32 eggs between the 5 adults. In the absence of any serious predators, these animals are going to expand their range very quickly. The population's already exploded. The babies sure are cute, but I'm concerned it's only a matter of time before someone gets seriously injured.
Today, authorities are at a loss as to the best course of action. While euthanization seems to be the popular choice amongst conservationists, a growing number of locals have voiced staunch disapproval. A nationwide movement known as Dinochirus Terrificus has already begun campaigning to protect these strange, shaggy behemoths. Recently, some ecologists have even gone so far as to suggest these animals may actually be beneficial to the park's fragile ecosystem. They argue that these animals may actually be filling an ecological niche that has gone unoccupied for over 13,000 years.
It's entirely possible, but until we thoroughly study these animals and the impact they're making on the environment, we really just don't know. The risk here is that by the time we find out, it might be too late.
Meanwhile, while the authorities scramble to decide their fate, the animals have gained at least one rather surprising ally, Tammy Fox.
Yeah. I've been giving tours at the park and the dinosaurs in my pickup truck since the news hit. Since it hit, I became something of a big deal. I had to quit my job at the Waffle House to handle the demand. It's crazy. I've got like a 3-month waiting list right now. You wouldn't believe it, I'd like to think that these things have found a home here. I don't think they're hurting nobody. And, the other day, I even seen one slurp up a 10-foot python like it was a noodle. They're slurping the snakes up. You keep far enough away. You let them do their thing. You won't have no problems with them. I say let's wait and see how this all shakes out because, people just love these things.
So this episode's star critter, Dinochirus, is absolutely one of my favorite dinosaurs. Beyond being an incredibly bizarre and fascinating animal, Dinochirus also has quite a history as one of paleontology's most alluring mysteries. One involving international fossil poachers, a pioneering paleontological team comprised entirely of women, and a huge pair of arms that filled the hearts and minds of countless children with awe and dread throughout the 20th century. To fill us in on the storied history of Dinochirus is my friend and science writer Pete Buchholz. Pete has written for many, many projects ranging from PBS's EONS, the Incredible Teros website, and has most recently contributed to the upcoming revitalization of the American Museum of Natural History's Hall of Gem and Minerals.
All right, Pete. Hi, welcome.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us. I was hoping that you might be able to share the story of Dinochirus with the listeners. It's got such a wild history of its fossil existence as well as its paleoecology. I love it. I would love for you to share all the fun nitty-gritty details of it with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit of the history of the species, how it was discovered, and all of that.
So Dinochirus was first discovered in Mongolia in 1965. It was found at a place called Altan Ula 3 in the Nemegt Basin. And it was discovered by members of the Polish-Mongolian paleo expeditions, which went to Mongolia in the 1960s and 70s and are actually, I think, one of the most important big-scale expeditions in the 20th century that had to do with paleontology. And they're still important today, and remarkable today. For one reason, the expedition leader was paleontologist Zofia Kieleniawarovska, and she was in charge of the expedition, and there were actually several other women who were in prominent roles in the expedition, which was pretty unusual at the time, and I would say even today, not super common. Yeah. Dino nuts are, of course, going to know Teresa Marjanska, Halska Osmolska, and Eva Ronjevich. Another reason I think this expedition is really important is the papers that they published are super detailed and have excellent illustrations. And what's especially notable for me, someone who doesn't speak Polish, is even though this all happened in the Cold War, all of this stuff was published in English. And today, it's all open access, which is pretty dang important if you're trying to learn anything about paleo using the internet. Uh, another another cool aspect is they just found lots of cool stuff. They found Pachycephalosaurus, homocephaly, and predacephaly, horned dinosaur Bagaceratops, the sauropods Nemegtosaurus and Episthosilicadia, the ostrich dinosaur Gallimimus, and some really cool specimens. Like the most famous specimens they discovered, and maybe the most famous dinosaur specimens of all, are the fighting dinosaurs, which are this Protoceratops and Velociraptor that were kind of locked in combat of some kind, and probably got killed by a dune like falling over and crushing them, and so they're locked in combat forever. And just an incredible find.
And among all of those really incredible discoveries, of course, was this giant-armed, mysterious behemoth, Dinochirus, right?
Yeah, it was actually found by Kila Yevarovska herself on July 9th, 1965. And what they had found were the bones of both arms, the shoulders, and the hands, and almost all the claws in the hands. Some rib fragments and some vertebrae fragments, but pretty much nothing else of the skeleton. And it was initially like not articulated. It was spread out over like a 3 meters by 4 meters just area of the ground, all scattered. But when they put everything back together, when they articulated it, it was absolutely bananas. It was clearly like an arm of a theropod, a giant meat-eating dinosaur, but it was bigger than any arm of any dinosaur or any meat-eating dinosaur they've ever found. It was over 8 feet long from like the ends of the claws all the way up to the shoulders. And so they just were left with these huge arms with these 3 fingers and giant claws and kind of a mystery.
Yeah, I remember being a young child dino nut and going through all my dinosaur books from the 70s, 80s, and 90s and seeing these speculative reconstructions of this mysterious Dinochirus, and it was like a kaiju apocalyptic carnosaur from hell. And there was always like some vaguely ominous description about how it could have been the biggest predator that's ever lived on the planet, and we should all be so glad that it's no longer with us. Was that actually kind of the consensus there for a while?
It's complicated. It was first named in 1970 by Osmolska and Ronjevich, excuse me. And they weren't actually quite sure what it was. They noted when they first described it that it was proportionally actually quite similar to Ornithomimus. There were also similarities in the humerus, but especially just like the size, shape, and proportions of all the hand and finger bones. But it was so much bigger than anything like Ornithomimus was at the time. So they named a new family for it, the Dinochiridae, and they put it into they thought it was a carnosaur. And at the time, the ideas about theropod phylogeny was a little weird. It's things were generally grouped into the carnosaurs if they were big, and coelurosaurs if they were small. And so with the carnosaurs, you get all sorts of things like spinosaurs, allosaurs, megalosaurs, tyrannosaurs, and like Ceratosaurus, all in this carnosaur group. And then with the coelurosaurs, you would get things like dromaeosaurs and Compsognathus and Silophysis, just because they were kind of big and small. Because Dinochirus is so big, they considered it to be probably a carnosaur, and the similarities to Ornithomimus they thought must have been convergent, or just like the way that theropod hands were primitively. So they considered it to have
Hmm.
branched off from the carnosaurs before the like megalosaur tyrannosaur split. So it must have had there must be like the origin of the Dinochirids back in the early Jurassic, or it was possibly even like a missing link between Silurisaurs and Carnosaurs. So it would have had like a ghost lineage back to the Triassic, possibly like more than 100 million years before it lived. Uh, so so that excuse me, so that gave people a lot of latitude to uh, kind of be open to having anything as the rest of the body of this.
Totally. I remember the alternative to that depiction was something that like I remember seeing a silhouette of like a 6-foot person, and then next to it was like a 40-foot tall, just scaled up Gallimimus that looked totally absurd. So there was a pretty strong inclination at that time that it certainly resembled ornithomimids, right?
Yeah, like I mean, when Osmolsky and Ronjevich first named it, they did point out that it looked like ornithomimids, and other paleontologists as early as later in 1970 just considered it was probably an ornithomimid or a close relative. Like there were many paleontologists, but not all, who thought that the similarities were probably an indication of close kinship rather than convergence. So, like after all of the like giant kaiju Dinochirus, there was kind of a phase of giant ornithomimus Dinochirus,
Yeah,
which was still like we don't know what the rest of the body is, so we're not. You can't really be sure that a giant
yeah,
Gallimimus is going to be correct either.
yeah. Um, so at what point did we actually gain the information to paint a more accurate depiction of what this thing looked like? When did that transition occur in its history?
So, in the middle to late 2000s and then early 2010s, there were more expeditions into Mongolia. This time it was a joint Korean and Mongolian team of scientists, and excuse me, uh, they went to revisit some of the same sites that the Polish and Mongolian team had visited in the 60s and 70s. Um, in 2006, they actually discovered another skeleton of Deinocheirus. They actually didn't know it was Deinocheirus at the time. But the thing with this skeleton is some of its pieces were already taken by poachers who had visited the site sometime between 2002 and 2006 and taken pieces away.
Mm.
So Mongolia has had, is my understanding, such a wild history of poachers and fossils getting nicked and picked up everywhere and then being disseminated all across the globe. For like the past 60, 70 years, it's been like a major issue, right?
Yeah, it's got a real serious poaching problem because it's blessed with so many amazing fossils. There's a lot of dinosaur aged exposures, a lot of dinosaur fossils. Uh, that coupled with there's not many big cities, not a lot of agriculture, and because it's so arid, there's not a lot of plant cover. It's really easy to find these fossils,
Mm.
and because there's so few people, there's such low population density. There's not a lot of people. There's not a lot of people who might see people stealing fossils. So it's unfortunately pretty easy to excavate, steal, and remove fossils from Mongolia. Uh, so, uh, excuse me. A lot of the poachers will not collect complete skeletons, which is what they did with with the Dinochirus. They'll tend to collect like skulls, hands, feet, teeth, claws, anything that's
Yeah.
easy to remove and like easily sellable. But more
Yeah.
recently, the Mongolian government and Mongolian paleontologists have really been cracking down and also actively trying to repatriate some of the stuff that has made it to like the commercial fossil market from Mongolia. You might remember Nicolas Cage and his Tarbosaurus.
Oh yeah. His international treasure. He paid like several $100,000 for that thing, right?
Yeah, he bought it from a dealer in Southern California, and it was actually bidding against Leonardo DiCaprio, but none of them had any idea
Wow.
that it was actually stolen. So of course, when it was determined that, yeah, this is Mongolian and you have to give it back, of course he gave it back. But wow.
That's yeah. Okay, so all those pieces are fragmented. People are, taking little bits of Dinochirus and spreading all over the place. What was the next chapter in this international saga?
Right. So the same Korean and Mongolian team rediscovered the original 1965 quarry of the first specimen, and they didn't find the rest of the skeleton, but they found some more stuff, including a lot of like tooth drag marks all over the bones that indicated that had been eaten or scavenged by a big theropod, and that must have been Tarbosaurus. Um, and the next year in 2009, they discovered a third skeleton of Dinochirus, again that had been visited by poachers previously. They had taken some feet, they had taken the skull and some hand bones. So by the end of 2009, like the scientific community, well, not the whole scientific community because it wasn't announced yet, but like at least some scientists knew that there were three Dinochirus
Right.
specimens, but at least parts of two of them were God knows where. Uh, so, uh,
Hmm.
so cut to 2011 in France. A fossil dealer contacted a Belgian paleontologist named Pascal Godefroy to like come down and look at some dinosaur bones that he had come into like ownership of, or who
Hmm.
became a custodian of these dinosaur bones, and like take a look at it, because they'd never seen anything like it before. And like when Godefroy saw this stuff, like they noted, like, hey, this is all weird, but the hand looks remarkably similar to Dinochirus from Mongolia. These are possibly stolen specimens. And it turns out that the specimens that were in France happen to be the pieces of those two Dinochiruses that were found in 2006 and 2009, because not only were they the right size for the missing pieces, but like the actual matrix that was still attached to the bones matched exactly. And it wasn't just like the lithology; it was like broken rock edges could like fit together, and the
Yeah,
poachers had
cool.
removed almost an entire foot, but left one claw in the ground. And of course, that one claw was discovered, uh, by the scientific team later, and fit perfectly with the rest of the foot. So eventually in 2014, all of this was published in like a scientific journal, and by that time
Hmm.
there were these three specimens, and almost every bone in the entire body was known, which was a huge jump in what we knew from like 2013 to 2014. Basically a mystery to like a completely known animal, which was really amazing.
That is so incredible. I just love that entire bizarre winding tale. And then the fact that it ends up coming to this bizarre thing. I mean, it's one of my favorite dinosaurs. And so
Me
for the
too.
for those of us that are just yeah, I love it. I love it. This and Parizenosaurus. I mean, the two of them. I'm just crazy about these weirdos. But so for those that are just able to listen and not see any visual representation of this thing, could you paint a picture of this beautiful bizarre behemoth?
Yeah. So it turns out it was actually an ornithomimosaur, but it was not a giant gallimimus at all. Because it's about the size of a Tyrannosaurus, it was going to be more robust than other ornithomimosaurs, but it was even more robust than like a Tyrannosaur. It had short legs, it had a pot belly, the claws on its toes were actually blunt like hooves, and it had this weird sort of humpback thing. Uh, and it also had a short tail with kind of a paiga style. where they think there were possibly like a feather fan or a brush or something at the end of its tail. But to me, one of the weirdest parts about it is its head. It's over a meter long. It's 3 feet long. And when you look at it from the side, it's kind of got this like kind of long tapering profile that resembles a toucan, except instead of being just like narrow like a toucan skull, the front of its skull actually widens out with this broad bill that kind of looks like a vacuum carpet attachment, for for lack of a better term. So it
Yeah.
was so like the whole animal is this giant tyrannosaur sized big beer belly, except probably plants and stuff, big beer
Yeah,
belly,
yeah.
short legged, slow slow animal with this big sort of crazy vacuum toucan head, and still these 8 foot long super long clawed arms. It's absolutely nuts. Oh, and they also found.
And
Oh, sorry, I was gonna
okay.
add. They also found gastroliths or stomach stones within kind of the belly of the largest specimen, which is something you normally find in animals that eat a lot of fibrous material and don't chew. But they also, which could indicate a lot of plants, but they also found fish scales in with the gastroliths. So it definitely ate fish as well. So, and probably had a pretty varied diet.
Rad. So the ecosystem that this lived in. So for the purpose of the NeoJurassic podcast, I knew that they lived in like a very swampy environment. So I imagine that they could potentially find a home in the Everglades. What was the actual paleoecology of their ecosystem like? What role did they fill? Who were their pals? Who were their roommates? Like, what did that world look like?
So it was found in a rock unit called the Nemegt Formation, which was formed about 70 million years ago. Um, at the time, Mongolia was fairly similar latitude to what it is now, and so like the actual amount of rain and heat would be pretty similar to Mongolia as it is today. But the Nemegt Formation itself shows that there was a pretty substantial meandering river system that moved into this valley. So instead of being kind of a dry, arid desert environment like most of Mongolia is today, or a lot of Mongolia is today, like the time during the Nemegt Formation was, or the time during when the Nemegt Formation was formed was really wet. So there was a pretty substantial river system that was coming through, lots of floods, floodplains. There was lakes, swampy areas. But immediately below the Nemegt Formation is a slightly older Barangoyit Formation. And then before that is the Jatakhta Formation, which formed about 5 to 10 million years before the Nemegt. And the Jatakhta is famous for like Protoceratops, Velociraptor, Oviraptor.
Right.
And the environment they lived in was pretty similar to the modern environment in which they're found, like a pretty arid, sandy desert with oases and kind of dry river washes like arroyos.
Yeah.
But, you know, about 5 to 10 million years after Velociraptor and Protoceratops were living, this substantial river system moved into the same area and completely changed the environment to like a very wet, hot, swampy environment. So I would say the Everglades would probably feel like home territory to them as far as like the environment, although the Nemegt was probably, bound within a valley rather than, in the middle of
Just
Florida.
flat. Yeah. Yeah.
But as far as like kind of swampy, lush area, it was pretty similar. Um, it lived with a lot of famous dinosaurs, other tyrannosaurs, like of course Tarbosaurus, uh, other ostrich dinosaurs. It lived with Parizenosaurus, which is another short-legged, slow, pot-bellied, giant-armed, giant-clawed theropod that is only distantly related to Dinochirus. They kind of ended up with a similar body plan through like completely different like evolutionary pathways, which I think is kind of cool.
Totally cool.
There's other smaller theropods. There's sauropods. There's pachycephalosaurs. There's duckbills, armored dinosaurs. There's at least an one-inch darkid pterosaur that lived there. Crocodiles, lots of invertebrates. It's like a very wet environment that had a lot of animals living there.
So rad. I would love to go back there. That is like
Oh
one of the
yeah.
formations
Oh
I would
yeah.
like kill to visit. It is just so biodiverse and fascinating. So what do we know about the Dinochirus family at this point? Like, there's a lot of mystery around it. I remember hearing recently that someone thinks that they may have found a relative as close to us as in Mexico, potentially. What does that family look like exactly?
Yeah, there's when the new specimens were published in 2014, they of course put them into a phylogenetic analysis, which is a complicated computer program that uses statistics to determine the most likely pathway that evolution took. And it's a way that family trees are constructed in biology,
Yeah.
uh, in a way that you can analyze like tens of thousands of data points without going crazy as a human being. Uh, they found that it wasn't ornithomimosaur like Gallimimus, but unlike ornithomimids like Gallimimus, which opted for kind of smaller size and very fast, uh, like the ability to run very fast, like Dinochirids got progressively bigger and much slower over time. So their defense against getting eaten was like being big with giant claws rather than just running away. There's two other Dinochirids known from Asia called Beishanlong and Garudomimus. But like what you were saying, there's another possible Dinochirid known from Coahuila in northern Mexico called Parizenosaurus. So far, it's only known from some scrappy remains, so we don't quite know if it actually is a Dinochirid. But if it is, I think
Right.
that's really cool because that would mean that there's potentially other Dinochirids elsewhere in North America or possibly elsewhere in in Asia. But it would be really
Right.
interesting if we found after all of these years in these well prospected North American deposits like the Hell Creek or Judith River or Scholard or something like that, if we found a Dinochirid that was living alongside like Triceratops or like Edmontosaurus or something, that would be pretty amazing, honestly. But they do keep finding new dinosaurs,
Totally.
even
Yeah.
in places that have been like looked at for more than 100 years.
Right.
So yeah, I think that would be really cool if we
Cool.
found some
Well,
more North American Dinochirids.
for sure. I hope we do. I mean, I love those. I mean, I mean, huh. I was just thinking about like the ecological niches that like a Therizinosaur would occupy versus a Dinochirus, and seeing them like migrate, from Asia into North America and what that would have looked like. Because there are Therizinosaurs in North America, right? At this point, like there are some that we know of.
Yeah, they I think actually some of the earliest therizinosaurs are from North America, from like the Cedar Mountain Formation and other early Cretaceous deposits.
Yeah.
Um, I'm I seem to remember that there were some Therizinosaur remains from later in the Cretaceous, but I actually don't remember off the top of my head. But I seem
Exactly
to
where. Yeah.
remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Cool. Well,
oh, I was gonna say, but yeah, like the more famous like giant long clawed Therizinosaurs are are mostly Asian.
Mongolia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, Pete, thank you so much for joining me and sharing this like enormous wealth of swashbuckling dino poacher tales and big waddling bizarre behemoth beasties. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, for sure. This has been a blast. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Typically, when you hear about an invasive or introduced species, it's a fairly small one. A cane toad, a zebra mussel, a rabbit, a mongoose, an Asian longhorn beetle, a starling, a carp, etc. Aside from livestock, it's exceedingly rare that we hear about any species of megafauna becoming an introduced species. By the way, megafauna by definition is an animal larger than 90 pounds. Just an FYI. So even in the world of Jurassic, the idea of a 9-ton, 40-foot-long goososaur like Dinochirus becoming an introduced species in a place like the Florida Everglades might seem far-fetched. However, the possibility might not be quite as implausible as you might expect. In fact, the Colombian government is currently struggling with a flourishing population of introduced multi-ton semi-aquatic megafauna all their own. Or rather, not their own. Megafauna from elsewhere, not their own. Well, I guess it's their megafauna now. It's their megafauna problem now. To learn more about this truly fascinating invasive situation, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Jonathan Shurin. Dr. Shurin is an ecologist at UC San Diego. His work focuses on the ecological health and balance of aquatic environments and ecosystems. He's been studying the effects these enormous creatures have had on the River Magdalena and its surrounding bodies of water throughout Colombia. The entire story and surrounding controversy is wildly fascinating to me, and I really cannot wait to share it with y'all. So let's dive in. If you could explain to the listeners exactly how Colombia wound up with a thriving population of large African mammals.
Sure, yeah. So Colombia had a civil war that went on for 50 years and ended formally in 2016. And during that time, it was a sort of attractive hotbed for illegal activity. So most notably cocaine and Pablo Escobar and the Cali cartel were used sort of using it for sort of criminal cartels of drug exporting. And Pablo Escobar was the leader of the Medellin cartel, and he was at one time one of the richest people in the world and a big figure in Colombia. He didn't really fly below the radar. He was sort of fairly prominent and public there. And he had a ranch outside of Medellin in the countryside near a town called Puerto Triunfo. And he had a fascination with large animals, and he's made a sort of private zoo for himself of collecting exotic animals. And I've read that he at one time had over 1,000 different sort of large animals, giraffes, and rhinos, and whatever else. He opened it to the public, so people from the neighboring towns could go and visit his zoo, and that was sort of part of why he was a bit of a folk hero, is that he sort of did things like that for the local community. And so he died in 1993. Although in Colombia, there's still a lot of talk that he is actually alive and well somewhere, perhaps in Brazil is what I've heard. But in any case, his empire sort of fell apart. And so somebody had to decide what to do about his zoo. And so most of the animals were shipped off to various other zoos around South America. But he had an original group of 4 hippos, 3 females and 1 male, living in a lake there. And obviously catching hippos in a lake is not an easy thing to do. Not anyone would have a good time. And so nobody was very excited about getting the hippos out of the lake. And so they did what any sensible people would do and just sort of left them to their own devices. And so they have been doing what hippos do best, which is make more hippos. And so the numbers have been slowly creeping up over the last 27 years or however long it's been since he died. And they've been sort of spreading out from the central population. So there's one main lake that has a group of maybe 20 to 30 of them, which is the one that's sort of easy to see. It's so they've turned his ranch into an amusement park. It's called Hacienda Nápoles. It has a sort of safari theme, so you can go and ride around, and they have attractions and rides and animals and things you can see. And there is a sort of wild population of hippos there. They keep them from moving around too much. They kind of go dump a bunch of food for them on the ground, so a lot of carrots and cabbage and things every day. It's not really much food. It's not really much of what they're eating, but it's sort of little treats for them that keeps them kind of in that main area. And so there's There's one main lake that has that main population, but they're not enclosed or confined in any ways. And so they have spread out, and there's a number of all the lakes are artificial. They're made by damming little streams for storing water for cattle ranching. And so there's a couple other those little lakes that have populations in them. And then they've spread into the Magdalena River, which is the big river that drains down into the Caribbean coast. So that's sort of the main drainage of the sort of central valley of the Andes there. And so that's a huge river, and hippos have moved in there, and so there are various little populations of them spread along the river. And as the river goes up and down, as through the rainy seasons and the drier seasons, they get sort of isolated. There are little floodplain lakes on the shores of the river that become isolated from the main river during dry seasons and are part of the river during the wet season. And hippos are found in a bunch of those now. And so they've spread. They've recently been seen as far as about 300 kilometers from Hacienda Nápoles, where they began.
Damn.
And so they've moved quite a distance. They're getting close to the Caribbean coast if they've gone that far, and there's a lot of habitat for them along the Magdalena River. There's a whole bunch of tributaries and a whole lot of wetlands, and a lot of places that hippos would be happy to live. So they've kind of become part of the local scenery and economy. So there's a certain amount of tourism to come and see them, mostly now foreign tourists, mostly Colombian tourists, although I imagine there may be more foreigners coming as the story becomes more better known. But when I've been there, I don't know if I've ever seen another foreigner other than me.
When was the last time you were down there?
2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So it's often said that the most aggressive and problematic large animal in Africa is the hippopotamus, and there are more, if I'm not mistaken, documented incidents with people with hippos than any other large mammal. Have you noted? I mean, I know you're not a hippo specialist, but it's curious to me that there is such a history of conflict in East Africa with hippos, but there doesn't seem to be as much documented conflict with the hippos in Colombia yet. Do you think that may be something that we would also see in the wetter parts of Africa where hippos live, where there's less conflict, less struggle for resources and territory?
Yeah, it might be. I mean, I don't really know. There was this year, in addition to hippos being seen far down towards the Caribbean, there also was an attack. A farmer was attacked near Hacienda Nápoles, who was sort of out tending his farm and got attacked and injured. So they're not necessarily more pacifist. The ones in the little lakes that we've studied, I mean, when we go to sample, like, we just kind of walk up to the lake and the hippos kind of look at us and we look at them, and they often sort of swim over to the other side of the lake and just kind of give us the stink eye. But in the river, they seemed to be much more aggressive. So when we drove a boat near them in the river, they sort of rose up out of the water and kind of, wiggled their ears and kind of had body language that said that they were not happy about us. And so I suspect that the ones in the rivers probably encounter people more often because there's more fishermen and things around. So they may have more dealings with people, and so they may have learned to not like people more than the ones in the lakes. So one of the next questions we do want to ask is whether their behavior is really different. And so one of our plans is to try and GPS collar or tag some number of animals so that we can see whether their movement patterns are different, whether they move around more or less than African hippos.
Yeah. God, it's such a fascinating situation. I mean, aside from the Asian water buff, I guess livestock has been introduced to every continent on Earth except for Antarctica at this point. So I guess that is like the other large invasive form of megafauna that we struggle with on this planet. Is there any documented detriment to the environment that you've been able to detect so far with their presence in Colombia?
Yeah, so adding nutrients to rivers and lakes is generally a negative, and in the sort of extreme can lead to eruptions of harmful toxic algae, bacteria, cause various kinds of bacteria to become more numerous. And can lead to eventually to anoxic conditions and death of fish and any other other animals that breathe air and water, breathe oxygen and water. And so we have observed that the oxygen concentrations get lower at night in hippo lakes, where the fertilization produces a lot more organic material and then decomposes at night, and that consumes oxygen.
Right.
So those kinds of things may become a problem in the future. Like right now, there's not, there's maybe somewhere around 100 hippos, which is not that many. But if they continue to grow at their current rate, they grew at about 10% per year from 1993 till now, and if you sort of draw that out, then you predict that there'll be thousands of them in the next couple of decades.
What concerns has there been any discernible effect of the hippo's very tiny genetic pool? Has there been any hint of that manifesting in their physiology? Have there been any concerns around that? What has been the conversation around that?
Yeah, that's another. So for one of our next, after we published our work on this, I was contacted by a group of veterinarians and people who are interested in sort of humane control of animal populations about the possibility of capturing and sterilizing enough of the hippos to prevent continued growth of the population. And so one of the things we'd like to do is to put GPS tags on them to see where they go, and then the other is to take genetic samples to sequence them and make a pedigree of the population, so you can sort of figure out who's related to who, and you can measure genetic diversity as sort of heterozygosity. That when you're very inbred, you tend to have very low heterozygosity, and so you have very low genetic diversity within your genome. And we should be able to see whether that's true or not, and whether that's possibly. The fact that the population is growing at a fairly rapid clip suggests that it's not that much of a problem for them, or it's not, they may be inbred, but they're still, still not having any trouble reproducing.
The situation itself down there as to like how to deal with this, slow boom of a paradigm shift down there. I understand that there has been significant disagreement as to how and when these hippos should be dealt with.
Yeah, there's very significant disagreement. And it's a real conflict between different, how you value different kinds of, organisms, and how, what you consider to be the natural state of ecosystems. So there's they have value as through sort of a tourist attraction, so they have some economic value. People come and see them and they spend money and go out to eat, and so there's a little cafe next to the lake that's full of main lake that's full of hippos, and there's a little town where people visit, and so there's there's some they have some sort of local support because of their sort of they do something for the local economy, and then people who are really interested in animal welfare are concerned about not wanting to sort of humanely dealing with them, and whether they should be dealt with at all. So I get asked this all the time, like, what should be done, and how should you do it? And there's not an easy answer to that. my personal belief is that there's not much of a justification for having them there. They're, not a native species, and they, as their numbers grow, conflicts with them will happen, and they will, they will start to, become a problem for people. And also, if you're going to do something, it's much better to do it when there's, from a humane standpoint, when there's fewer of them than when there's more of them. So if, there gets to be thousands of them, that means that if you decide to remove them, you have to remove thousands of them rather than hundreds. And that's obviously much more expensive and difficult, and, sort of requires you to, deal with a lot more individuals. But it is a really interesting question, because, people have really divergent opinions on what is the right thing to do. Are these, in some sense, natural? Is there some sense in which this is now what you call naturalized species, a species that has sort of gone native and now is just a part of the ecosystem and should be sort of treated like any other? Or is it, is it sort of restoring some, some lost feature of, Colombian ecosystems that was around, prior to human settlement in the New World? And those are all, they're tricky questions.
For sure. And I believe I heard that some type of legislation was passed locally that protects the hippos from any type of attempted management or culling of them. Are you familiar with that?
I have not heard that. The main person I deal with there is David Echeverry, who's a biologist for Cornari, which is the local government authority, sort of environmental authority. And he is convinced that something needs to be done about them and should be done sooner rather than later, but also recognizes that that anything that involves killing them is going to be completely unacceptable. That when they've been killed in the past, it's caused a huge uproar, and I'm sure his phone blows up, and it brings all sorts of bad attention. So he's interested in looking for solutions that are, humane solutions that are going to not just sort of allow them to continue to just kind of spread and reproduce unchecked.
And from here, it seems like the most humane option would be to capture the males and neuter them. No, from my perspective, that looks like the way to go.
Yes. So I'm now speaking out of my knowledge, but I've been talking with these veterinarians. So there is apparently a chemical treatment that can be used to sterilize females. The problem with sterilizing, them, doing anything that involves, so they do not have external testes. So you cannot just neuter them the way you would a pig or a cow or something. And so it involves really doing surgery, which, you can sort of imagine, they're often in groups. They only really come out of the water at night. They're very hard. If you can't just if you dart them and they go in the water, then they just sort of sink in the water and drown and die. And so you have to dart them somewhere away from the water. And then you have to, do surgery on some huge sleeping animal. And so the preferred method that I've heard about is some chemical treatment that sterilizes the females, and can be sort of just administered as a shot. And so that's sort of the sort of preferred plan at this point.
What is from where you've been, what is the perceived level of alarm amongst people around this situation?
I would say among sort of local people who live there, they've just kind of gotten used to them, and they're not alarmed at all. Among biologists and people sort of involved in environmental issues in Colombia, there's kind of a growing urgency sense of urgency that something should be done about them. So I think there is getting to be more of a kind of momentum to try and do something about them. I mean, the question is, who's going to pay for it? How's it going to be done? That's sort of the real problem. But there's a Colombian sort of wildlife biology society that released a statement saying that they should be removed, by one way or another. And so, there are groups of people that are kind of making more noise to say we can't just sort of let this continue.
If only there was some benevolent and very, very wealthy drug lord that offered up funds to
I know.
Humanely manage the situation.
I know. I don't know such people, so I have no way of contacting them.
Oh, come on. It's 2021. There has to be some type of ecologically concerned drug lord out there just waiting to help.
A LinkedIn for drug lords. Yeah, I don't know. I don't. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think they. I mean, that was sort of one of the unique things about Pablo Escobar was that he was willing to sort of have a high profile, whereas most people who make their livelihoods off criminal endeavors try and kind of fly below the radar a bit.
Not him.
So they're not generally interested in doing things that call attention to themselves. So yeah, I don't. I mean, there may be maybe one of your listeners is such a person who would really like to. And if so, they should contact me. They would really like to contribute to trying to find a humane solution to this. But we are, I mean, if they're, I sort of see if people are going to go to the trouble of catching them, and it seems that people want to. I mean, I think this sort of, the sort of potential to do research with them would be really interesting. Looking at their genetics, looking at their behavior and their movement.
Totally.
And then the other thing we really want to do is if you take fecal samples, you can sequence the DNA and you can see what they're eating. You can see what kind of bacteria are living in their guts and what kind of parasites they have. And we can compare that with samples from African hippos. So we can ask whether their interactions with other species, their gut bacteria, their food, the plants that they eat, or the parasites that infect them are different in the New World. And, one idea is that invasive species do well because they escape from their parasites. And when you put them in a new range, they don't have all these sort of co-adapted parasites and diseases that they get. I
would imagine the inverse is true, as history has documented many times, that they don't have any built-in defenses for parasites in Colombia, and plants that may have adapted a particular toxin that they haven't managed to evolve a response to, and so on.
Yeah, that's possible as well.
How would you, and I know this is not your area of expertise, but you may have something to add. How do you think the United States, particularly in light of 2020 and in looking at how Colombia has dealt with it, how would you imagine they would respond to a herd of hippos somewhere in the swampy marshes of Florida?
Yeah, I think we would probably have the same problems that Colombia has, and that there's a lot of disagreement between different groups of people about what so Florida is, of course, well familiar with all sorts of invasive wildlife, right? And nutrients, pythons and green iguanas and all sorts of things.
It's like practically its own new biosphere continent.
Yeah.
It's got critters from all over the place, everywhere.
Yeah, and and as there's there's people that go and kill pythons and things like that, and and there's there's a lot of disagreement about it. I'm trying to think. I can't really think of a good sort of analog. I mean, there are invasive species that people like and value. The example I always think of is like Pacific salmon in the Great Lakes, where we've introduced Chinook and coho salmon into all the North American Great Lakes, and people love going and fishing for them, and they're very popular. And most people would not consider them to be, a problem at all, even though they're, not native and they were introduced, and they're definitely now just part of the ecosystem. So it's sort of, when people value different, species differently, then you get these kinds of conflicts. The group that we're dealing with that's interested in sterilizing them, their other main projects are about sterilizing cats and dogs in the Galapagos. So where there are feral cats and dogs, and they, eat baby giant tortoises, and iguanas, and all that. So they're, they have a real effect on native wildlife there.
Absolutely.
And so, people obviously don't want you going and killing cats and dogs. So, then the question is, well, what are you going to do?
Truly wild. So there has been some discussion around, this is like a somewhat fun topic, but there's been this conversation around how this environment may be benefiting from the presence of an introduced large mammal, herbivore. And then there's this ongoing discussion about Pleistocene rewilding and filling in ecological niches that have been abandoned for most of documented human history. Are you familiar at all with this conversation? And if so, does it relate at all to the situation with the hippos from your perspective?
Yeah, I am. I know about those discussions. And I guess the question is what is the ecological state that you're trying to restore your ecosystem to, and what is the sort of ecological benefit of any particular species? So, there's this idea that grazing animals really maintain savanna ecosystems or grassland ecosystems, prevented them from turning into forests by sort of grazing heavily on trees, and sort of the way elephants kind of maintain savanna ecosystems as open. They sort of knock down trees and rip out seedlings and things like that. What are the sort of specific ecological functions that you're trying to restore with introduced megafauna? There's a really interesting paper from the 60s or 70s that there's a lot of plants in the New World tropics, and the New World, South and Central America, that have fruits, these sort of gigantic fruits that could only have been dispersed at one time by really large animals, right? So plants make fruits in order to, sort of lure some animal into dispersing their seeds for them, right? And so there's a number of plants that have, really gigantic fruit, and you're like, well, what could possibly have, dispersed a fruit of that size? And the idea is that, those plants really evolved in response to, sort of using really large animals that are now extinct, and that these plants are still around today as sort of a vestige or a remnant of this this ecosystem that used to have these really large animals in them.
Yeah.
So it's possible that hippos could, I suppose, do things like that. They pretty much eat grass, and so I don't know that they're not likely to like eat a big fruit and disperse it. It's sort of a question of what is the ecosystem function that you would, and they may maintain vegetation in sort of an open state. They often make what are called grazing lawns, where they sort of go back to the same area over and over and graze the grass down really short, and that sort of maintains it in sort of a fast growing kind of lawn, keeps out the other vegetation that would, the sort of, woodier plants that would turn it into a more of a forest kind of situation. And so, they may be, those kinds of environments are often important for a lot of other species that benefit from that kind of thing. Those are things we just don't know about what, what effects hippos are having in Colombia. But the question of, what is the sort of desired target state for, for restoration, is it, the way Colombia was when, when Europeans arrived 500 years ago or whatever, or is it the way, it was when, indigenous people arrived, 15 or 20,000, whenever indigenous people arrived, from Asia, long, centuries, millennia ago.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, sort of, and the other question is, what are their effects on other, native taxa? The other ones there that are of concern are manatees that are in the Magdalena River. There's large river turtles and caimans and, various other kinds of species, and, what effect hippos may have, or what, if any, of, interactions they may have with those species, we just don't know.
Hopefully at this point, the idea of a booming population of Dinochirus spreading throughout the Everglades might be a little bit more tangible to you. As is the case with the hippos, I can very easily foresee quite a controversy arising over how to handle the situation. It wouldn't take long before enterprising locals would find ways to exploit the existence of these enormous exotic animals for their own financial gain. It happens all over the place. It happens anywhere one can either make or lose a buck. If you visit any place on the planet and you find yourself a critter bigger than 89 pounds, you can be sure to find entire economies built around either eating them, feeding them, or setting up some low-budget side-of-the-road pet-and-play circus around them. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you might stumble across a one-stop shop opportunity and you can get yourself all the above. So while the local government would squabble over the best course of action, I have no doubt an entire economy would spring up around Dinochirus terrificus tourism in a matter of days. And unlike the hippos, Dinochirus would likely have a much faster rate of reproduction. The situation could easily become untenable in just a few years. Pretty bonkers stuff, isn't it? Who'd have thunk there'd be an invasive hippo situation in Colombia? At the end of our discussion with Dr. Shurin, we discussed the idea that these hippos might actually be fulfilling an ecological niche that has gone abandoned for most of recorded history. This idea is part of a much larger and controversial conversation being had amongst ecologists and conservationists all over the planet. As biodiversity and ecological stability collapses all around us on every continent, there's a growing movement towards this concept of Pleistocene rewilding, an effort to somehow return global ecosystems' biodiversity and functionality back to a time before a combination of factors led to a mass extinction of megafauna at the end of the Pleistocene. Up to this point, any serious effort pursuing the de-extinction of any long-gone species has been intrinsically linked to this Pleistocene rewilding concept. As you can imagine, this concept is of tremendous interest to those of us intrigued by the possibility of a Neo-Jurassic world, or in this case, a Neo-Pleistocene world. There's a lot to parse through here, and we've just barely scratched the surface of this conversation. However, y'all can expect a much more thorough exploration of these ideas in a future episode of the show. I mean, it is just so essential to this entire project, and one that I find very, very interesting. Speaking of future episodes, as I mentioned at the start of this one, our exploration into the possibilities of a Dinochirus population in the Everglades will be a two-parter. The second half will be dropping next Friday, so please be sure to tune in as we travel down to the wilds of South Florida and wrangle us some invasive swamp critters. As a native Floridian, I can confirm for you, Florida is wild, it is weird, and it's got more non-native species than any other state in the United States. I wouldn't be surprised if it has more invasive animals than pretty much anywhere else. Joining us will be self-described reptile researcher, biologist, and invasive critter trapper, Jenna Call. Jenna will be guiding us through the murky waters and thick reeds of the Everglades as we learn about all the weird critters that have found themselves a new home there. It's going to be a really fun one, and you're not going to want to miss it. As we near the close of this episode, it's time to explore the Jurassic Fantasies with another one of our friends and fellow fans, Sam Endres. Sam is yet another member of the wonderful Jurassic Outpost team and is generally a total delight. Throughout our conversation, we'll discuss favorite dinos, the ill-fated and much-beloved Jurassic World Live Tour, and a thorough investigation into what Sam's ideal de-extincted pet might be. I hope you enjoy. What would you say is your personal relationship to the Jurassic Park franchise at this point?
At this point, I gotta say it's kind of been integral in shaping my life, especially these past few years when I really got involved in the Jurassic fandom.
Mhm.
Um, most of my friends now are because of Jurassic.
Yeah.
A lot of the friends that I talk to over, we do Jackbox games and Zoom together during this pandemic. They're all because of Jurassic. So I think that's kind of special. And like I met you because of Jurassic too.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so I like that it, has brought a lot of people together, and everybody has just kind of become my family because of
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. And what is your relationship to like the world of Jurassic World at this point, and that narrative and that story and the films, the television, the theme parks? Like, what is your relationship to all of that?
Um, it's expanded over the past few years with so much more. Like I mean, I didn't go to the theme parks until a few years ago.
Yeah.
But watched the movie when I was little when it came out, read the books. It was more of like just got me interested in science and dinosaurs,
Hmm.
and Michael Crichton in general.
Hmm.
But then it got into like being part of I don't know, being part of the franchise in a weird way because being on Jurassic Outpost.
Yeah.
So, we're helping spread the news to everyone, and kind of being that link a little bit
Yeah.
between um, the movies and stuff and the fans. Um, so I think it's been really fun, and I'm glad that I can be a
Was
part
that
of it
you
in some way.
narrating some of the recent Jurassic videos,
Yes,
Outpost
it
videos?
was. I did
Okay, you
2
did a
of
great
them.
job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah, that was really fun, and it was nice because like I just read off a script. So
Yeah. Did you write it too, or did someone else write it?
no, that was I think both Jack and Chris
Okay.
wrote both of those. Um, but yeah, that was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, I loved it. Um, what aspects of Jurassic and dinosaurs do you find most fascinating and alluring? What draws you to that, do you think?
Um, well, I think at first it was, when I was little, watching the movie and then reading the book. It was it made like dinosaurs seem like it was possible, like like they could come back to life at some point.
Hmm.
Because I mean, as a little kid, I was like, yeah, this science absolutely makes sense, and
Yeah.
we're gonna have dinosaurs at some point, right?
Yeah.
um, but beyond that, I think that got me into dinosaurs. And then I remember, for whatever reason, in school, we did like a whole dinosaur learning section. So we got to color dinosaurs and, learn the names and all of that stuff. Um, but I don't know. I think they're fascinating that they're creatures that were once on this earth that we don't really know a lot about, and that we're only kind of guessing from what evidence is left of them.
Yeah. It's such a fun mystery to and like such a little treat to have these little windows open up in news where we learn something crazy and new about this animal that existed so long ago. It's so fun. There's so much potential there.
Mm-hmm. I know. I enjoy seeing those. Like, oh, guess what? This dinosaur didn't look like how we thought it looked 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, gonna have to redraw everything, guys.
Like every 2 weeks it feels like it, and it's such a pressure to maintain scientific accuracy with Jurassic, and it's just gotten harder with these developments happening every other
Hmm.
day, it feels like.
I think that's a cool part of it, though, too. It's because, obviously not all the dinosaurs in Jurassic look like their real life counterparts,
Yeah.
but I think it's cool that some of them, looked like how we thought they looked like back when they were made.
Hmm.
So, like the Spinosaurus specifically, like
Yeah.
we thought that's what it looked like then.
Yeah.
That's not what it looked like.
Yeah,
JK.
but it's a fun little like time capsule of like our
Yeah.
understanding of what we thought that was.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like the very first dinosaur drawings that people ever did, where they're like just absolutely wacky lizard looking things, you know. It's
Yeah.
like how far we've come in science, you know.
Yeah. What would you like to see in the future of the franchise? And I mean that as open as you like.
Ellie Sattler, everything.
Yeah.
She's my girl. So but we are getting her and Sam Neill back. So that was a little bit of my dream from
Yeah.
I think probably first when Jurassic World came out. And I'm like, wait, we're
Yeah.
not getting them. But I honestly I would like more books.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know specifically which characters. Maybe like a Henry Wu book or something.
Yeah.
Get into his mind a little bit. I think that would be interesting. Because I
sure.
really enjoyed Claire's book. Like,
Yeah, it was great.
I don't know that I'd want more young adult necessarily.
Yeah.
Just my personal preference, but
Same.
I did enjoy that. I liked seeing the character getting a little background. So really any kind of book spinoffs of people would be, I think, a lot of fun.
For sure.
And then I really enjoyed the Jurassic World live tour and what they were able to do with that. Did you get to see that before?
I
it shut down?
didn't. No.
If you get a chance, if it starts back up,
If it ever
hopefully.
happens again, yeah.
Because it was amazing. Like I loved it. And
What did you love about it? I've only seen clips, and I was really impressed with the way they used the score from the movies in the show. I thought they handled that really well, but I don't know anything about the show.
yeah, so I think they expanded upon the world really well, but also had it fit in and it felt like Jurassic the whole time.
Yeah.
So like the main character, Dr. Kate Walker, um, absolutely cool scientist chick who's out there like beating up dudes, but also is like really deeply cares about the dinosaurs.
Uh-huh.
She was amazing, and she's one of my favorite characters in the Jurassic universe at this point.
Oh, cool.
So I'm really sad that a lot of people didn't get to experience
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
But no, they got to expand more and like show us different areas of the island, which we've also they touched on with Camp Cretaceous, which I was really happy about.
Yeah.
So I just like exploring what else is going on.
What type of scientist is Dr. Kate Walker? What's her specialty, her field?
I want to say like animal behaviorist, I think.
Okay.
Because she's working with a Troodon, which is like the big green dinosaur
Giant
puppet thing that we
Compy
usually see.
puppet, yeah.
Yes, that looks like a compy. She's working with it and has this little like emotional reader that goes on the dinosaur. And so she can look at this little like it's basically kind of like a mood ring. And so she can see what the dinosaur is feeling and kind of work with it that way.
Okay.
So it's more like Owen, but the emotional side of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And then just what they were able to accomplish as well was amazing with the life-size like raptor costumes and the stunt show was cool. I mean, there are people inside those raptors running around for 2 hours.
Yeah, that's wild.
But I don't know, it was just amazing. I loved it. So things like that where I guess you don't have the pressure of the main series, but you still get Jurassic and you get the feel of it, but you get a little more fun and new things in that same world. That's what I would love to see more of.
Now I just have a few more little bit more fun questions.
Yeah.
First, if you could bring back any species, bring it back from extinction, what species would it be?
Parasaurolophus.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah, that's fine. That has become my favorite dinosaur in recent years. And on the like, if we're thinking about which dinosaurs to bring back, like realistically, I'm not gonna pick a carnivore
Yeah.
because like I don't want to eat meat.
Yeah.
But I mean, like they say in the first movie, I mean the herbivores are like kind of giant cows, right?
hmm
But I could also potentially ride the Parasaurolophus.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
So it gets into like a little Dinotopia
Yeah.
kind of want there. But I don't know. I just love them. I think they're cool. And
I love them too. They're always one of my favorites. Sort of related, and it may be the same answer, but if you could have any pet, like a genetically engineered dinosaur pet, what would it be?
Well, I've thought about this too, because like if we're gonna genetically modify them, you could technically make like a mini T-Rex or something, right? Like,
right.
But still, I don't know. Like a little, if I could have like a baby raptor, but it stayed baby.
It stayed a baby.
Like a toy raptor.
I saw some at Target earlier.
I have one of the little baby blue plushes. And it's so cute. Like I would love
I
that
love
as
the
a
baby
pet.
raptors so much. I want like a show of just the baby raptors.
Right?
Yeah, they're so cute.
I know. I sort of feel like they would be like cats, like personality wise, but like you could have them bite your enemies if they, came around.
I mean, I've seen cats bite enemies too.
Oh, totally. So they'd be like a mix of cat and dog where they could like protect your house and just bite people that pissed you off. Can you imagine just like walking a little raptor squad down the street?
I mean, I think about it every day.
Oh god, that'd be great. But
it would be.
I mean, or like really any of the herbivores. I mean, if I had the space, Brachiosaurus is just a big open thing. A Brachiosaurus is, and like just doing their thing. I think that'd be really cool.
How wonderful would that be? How tranquil.
Because like I grew up on a farm, and so I'm very used to like cows and horses just kind of like chilling in a field. That's really what I imagine they do, just bigger, Yeah.
I mean, the sauropods are believed to have just been like eating constantly because they needed to eat constantly to survive. So
right. If we get into that aspect, they're not really a good choice to bring back as pets because like I wouldn't be able to feed them.
Yeah, they're going to be very demanding with their dinner.
Just constantly just stripping all the trees and so maybe the little raptors as pets. Feed them meat.
Seems easier to manage.
Yeah.
Well, that just about wraps things up for now. I sincerely hope y'all have enjoyed this first installment of our Everglades invasive situation two-parter. The second installment should be arriving next Friday, and I do hope you'll join us again for that one. I would also like to mention that in the near future, the YouTube version of the NeoJurassic podcast will be augmented with some cool visuals, video interviews. Oh, speaking of which, if y'all would like to join me for a future Jurassic Fantasies segment, hit me up and let me know. I would love to set up a video chat interview with y'all for some future episodes. Anyway, as the saying goes, be sure to like, subscribe, tell your friends, leave an effusively glowing podcast review, etc. And until then, bye!